I always prefer to go where we are most strong in terms of our evidence. So he was definitely viewed as a Thracian bard, that is a singer and a poet. He lived in a historical place at a historical time, and he was a real dude, and he wrote real poems. It's really Clement of Alexandria that makes the strongest connection between Orpheus and Jesus in the Protrepticus. And in the Protrepticus, Clement portrays Jesus as the true Orpheus. There's a hymn that Jesus sings as Orpheus, but it's because Jesus is the true Orpheus when the Logos said Orpheus Dei, the Orpheus of God, who was Jesus. So this is a fairly common idea. The Homeric or Greek Hermes was the Logos insofar as he transferred logi, that is messages. But when he becomes Hermes thrice great, that Logos aspect is enriched. So he becomes very much the creator of the world, much more like the Logos in John 1. She received huge attention from Vespasian, later became a huge donor, the Emperor Vespasian, for both Isis and Osiris. It's received huge funding, an amazing temple. This is the reason why Roman Catholics today don't give communion to people who aren't Roman Catholic. The same thing with the Greek Orthodox, because those are mysteries. And if you're not really part of that religious identity, get out.
And I'm with, once again, the great sage, M. David Litwa. And we have a course coming up. A lot of you guys know about this course coming up. It is amazing. I was helping editing it, and there is so much information in these courses that you cannot get on Wikipedia. This is real, deep scholarship, and it's straight to the sources, straight to what the ancient texts say, straight to what the archaeology says. This is all really amazing stuff. And so just also real quick, Dr. M. David Litwa, his Patreon is one of my go-to resources for learning about early Christianity, Gnosticism, ancient mystery religions, and things related to those things. And there's exclusive content on there that you can't get on his public YouTube channel that he's actually starting to launch now. So you can go to his YouTube channel, which I linked in the description, and there's videos on it that are public. But if you want to go deeper than that, there's the Patreon. So just want to throw that out there before we begin. How you doing today?
Exactly. Thanks, Neil. What I always tell people is I'm not dumbing it down here. I give you the material I would give to any undergraduate classroom or preliminary graduate student. And I give further reading, and I let you take it from there and make your own decisions. There is a lot out there, and what I'm trying to do is get that scholarly, evidence-based information out there.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what you've been doing. So what I want to do today is give a little bit of a teaser on what these courses are about. We have 7 main areas of what we're looking at, and it's the 7 different locations that practice the mysteries and their respective rites, their theologies, and they relate to each other, and they're also very different. And so I figured we'll start with the Samothracian mysteries. What can you tell us, without giving away too much, because we got the course, but just to give people an appetite of what is out there and what they might be interested to go further on?
Well, I love the Samothracian mysteries because one of our main literary sources for them is one of my very favorite of all, basically Christian or sometimes Gnostic Christian groups, and that is the Nicene. And the Nicene writer says that there was a mystery cult in Samothrace, and that as you entered the sacred chamber, there were 2 men called Adamos, and in the plural Adames, and they were completely naked, and that they had their penises erect like hardened stone. And as you went through this sacred chamber, you were reminded of the secret mysteries of what he thought was, you know, male energy, but allegorized as the pure, rational, life-creating force of the universe.
Wow.
But there's so much more. And obviously the Nicene writer is talking, you know, in very late 2nd century, and these mysteries were running for, they're as old as the Eleusinian mysteries, and so they're half a millennium or more prior to Jesus.
Wow. Now that is amazing. And I've edited the course, obviously, and I'm just gonna say real quick, that's just 1% of the iceberg right there. Right off the bat, and course number 1, you really just hit a home run with this one, with the Samothracian mysteries, this island in the middle of is it the Aegean Sea? Is that what they call it?
Yep.
Yeah, right in the middle of the Aegean. Well, kind of not in the middle, but like you're off the coast of like where Thrace is, I guess, right? Thrace and Macedonia.
Yeah, northern Aegean. You can still go there today and see the archaeological ruins. The archaeological ruins of this cult site are extremely well preserved and really worth visiting.
Wow. And the last thing I want to, before we go to the next one, this Adamas, is there a connection to Adam at all, or is this just a coincidence?
Well, the Nicene writer thinks so. We have an inscription addressing the Samothracian gods as Adames, and in Greek that means unconquered ones, or men of steel. And the Nicene preacher connected that to the primal human deity, who was Adamos, and who was the model for the first earthly human being called Adam.
Wow. So you could this Nicene preacher, whoever he was clearly some sort of religious genius. Just like putting things in places and connecting dots that no one else was thinking about, way ahead of his time. Very much of a syncretist, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, syncretism has a little bit of a bad connotation. I would probably just call him cosmopolitan. He's a polymath. He's very, very bright, but he's doing a lot of things that people of his time were doing, that is allegorizing the mysteries. And so in that sense, he's not entirely unique, but he's certainly fun to read and distinctive among Christian authors.
And so he has this Nicene preacher hymn that's given down to us by Hippolytus. And according to Hippolytus, he applies it to Jesus. Now, do you think this actually got outside of his group or his cult, or do you think this was used by other Christians as well? Because I'm not sure if it was, but what do you think?
Well, you're opening a huge can of worms. So the first thing I should say is that yes, all this material is transmitted by a heresiologist. I don't think it's Hippolytus. He used to be called Hippolytus, but this heresiologist, we don't actually know his name. So I just call him the Refutator, because he writes the Refutation of All Heresies. But basically the preacher, the Nicene preacher, quotes a hymn, actually several hymns, but 2 of the hymns to Attis, and we'll get to Attis in a moment, we believe are Hadrianic, that is written in the early 2nd century in the reign of Hadrian, and would have been sung in Alexandria in throughout the Mediterranean world. We don't know how well known they were, but they're not written by the Nicene preacher. They are actually cult hymns in honor of Attis. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow, that's really fascinating. And do you think, well, you know what? I'm just going to go on to I was going to ask you about the Antonius Hadrian sort of, would you call that a cult, or like a little bit of a, what would you even call that? His dedication to his boyfriend who passed away. Was there a religion based off that, or was that just a one-off thing?
Oh, absolutely. Antinous was a full-blown Greco-Roman god, and we have more sculpture of Antinous than we do of many other traditional Greco-Roman gods. He was extremely popular, worshipped throughout the Mediterranean, and therefore really bugged and bothered the Christians. And yeah, that's a separate session in itself, but absolutely. And there were also mysteries of Antinous that were generated in the 140s and celebrated where he was worshipped.
I think at the very least, it shows us that the mentality of the times was there. You can have a new god or a new apotheosis or a new religion just sprout up out of nowhere. Like, not out of nowhere, but like people were being more creative with their spirituality in this time period. Whereas now it's kind of like, oh, you're either a Muslim or you're a Christian or you're a, and like then you had the new age people. But like this in this time period, it seems like there was a lot more openness to spirituality. Or what would you say?
Well, I would say that, yeah, ancient Greco-Roman Hellenic style religion is much more like modern Hindu styles of religion, where you do have deified ancestors and people becoming gods all the time, and the pantheon can expand. And I mean, I guess it could retract, but usually it expands, and you see divinity in everything and everyone, and you're open to new gods. And new gods, don't threaten the old gods, because divinity isn't a zero-sum game. Like, if I get divinity, you don't lose it. Whereas in modern monotheistic religions, the patriarchal god gets really angry if he has a competitor, because that takes away from his worship. So he will blast and attack you.
Interesting. I want to move over now to the great mysteries of Eleusinian mysteries. I was
Eleusinian, yep.
Yeah, Eleusinian. This is right near Athens, pretty much, and this was a very famous ancient mystery site. And yeah, these secret mysteries that apparently Aeschylus, the poet, got in trouble for releasing too much knowledge of this place. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. This is also in the courses, but we're just going to give you a little taste of what's going to be in the course.
Yeah, so Eleusinian mysteries are sort of like the basic prototypical mysteries. They are the prototypical celebration of the invention of agriculture. And they tell the story of how basically the people were dying, and how the Divine Mother lost her daughter, and the so-called rape of Persephone, and her redemption out of the earth, and how that is involved with the grain and the gift of the produce by the mother deity, in this case, Demeter. And there were mysteries. And again, we have the foundations of the Mystery Hall still preserved today that you can go see. And it was, again, the prototypical mystery. If you were starting a mystery cult, you would often use Eleusis as a model for how you were going to run the cult. And the most famous attack on Eleusis was by Clement of Alexandria in his book, The Protrepticus. And so, yes, Christians eventually fought hard, and when they gained control, they finally closed down the Eleusinian sanctuary, which was running very strong up until the 5th century.
Wow.
So that's, again, 500 years of roughly after Jesus.
Would you consider this to be a mysteries that are somewhat influenced by the Sumerian Ishtar, Tammuz mythology?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, we're dealing with part of what everyone should know is that the mysteries were in fact never revealed.
Right.
And so they have to be reconstructed. But there's lots of myths and stories that have to do with agricultural production, the loss of grain and then the finding of grain, the dry season and the wet season. And in some respects, we do think that, yeah, a lot of these stories are entangled, but they were definitely local color, local variants. We do know that at Athens, they celebrated the Adonis cult, which Adonis is Tammuz, and they made gardens for Adonis, which means that they made little pots with which you grow grass in, and then the grass quickly withers and dies, and then you throw that away in a celebration. And this ritual is still preserved today in modern Persia and Iran.
Oh, wow.
And yes, it's part of the Hafsin ceremony or ritual. So yeah, it's extremely widespread ritual activity.
Yeah, I was talking to Kyle Ruck about this, and it seems to be a allegory for the seasons, dying and death and rebirth, in the sense of, the plants die and wither, but they give us the seeds. The seeds can plant new seeds, and so it's a resurrection. It's coming from that. It's like it's a cycle, but but when you reflect that to the human condition, it's very interesting to see, because sometimes in our lives we have to go through passions and downturns, but we rise up through them. So yeah, it's not surprising that people in the ancient world would be really attracted to this,
Yeah, the mysteries, to put it another way, were a way for ancient people to live their myths. Whereas we are divorced from the truth of the myths, they lived their myths. That is, they saw them reenacted and they participated in them. They became the characters in the myth. And so that experience was revolutionary and life-changing. The closest thing that we have would be, I guess, these passion plays that sometimes Christians put on, where they literally, reenact the crucifixion of Jesus, and even put a guy, with fake blood on a cross and have him scream. And that is sort of these mystery plays, these passion plays, is the closest that Christians come to this reenactment of the mysteries. But in the end, it's fundamentally different, because it was much more involved and widespread in the ancient world.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a lot more different. And plus, it's based on a historical person and historical time period, a real grassroots movement happening in the Galilee. So it has that personal aspect when it comes to Christianity. But I do think it's interesting that they a lot of these parables are agricultural. The vine, I am the vine, my father is the husbandman, or you're the planting the seeds. Some of them will grow up and get choked by a vine. Like, a lot of the imagery seems to be using agricultural. I don't know if that's on purpose or if it's just that's an easy way to tell an allegory. You know what I mean?
Yes, but I would caution against what I consider the apologetic argument that Christian apologists like to say that their religion is historical and other religions are more mythical and allegories of nature. And that's not really the case. It's more like both and, in my understanding. They actually did believe that Demeter visited Athens.
Right.
And they did believe that she lost her daughter. And they did believe that those events happened historically, because Demeter interacted with other historical characters in Athenian history, namely Tritolamus, who was the Athenian Johnny Appleseed, who spread the knowledge of agricultural production. So it's not just a matter of, oh, this is just an allegory of how nature works. These are repetitions of historical events as they were understood by the ancients. Now, again, I say that we are alienated from the truth of the myth because we no longer attribute any historical value to it, but they did, and that's really important to remember.
Yeah, and even someone like Dionysus, who's also linked with Demeter in many ways, they're telling the story of Alexander the Great going all the way to India, and he's looking for the places where Dionysus was. Like
exactly.
you wouldn't waste your resources finding some mythical character's location. They really thought he was out there. I think that's a fact.
Absolutely, they did. That's just how they thought, precisely.
Yeah. Interesting. So the next one I want to talk about a little bit, it's also in the courses, and we'll just like I said, we'll scratch the surface on these. The Orphic Dionysian, because we were just talking about Dionysus, so just to stay on the topic, I guess. But the Orphic mysteries are a little bit separate, and they're in a different location, I believe. Will you tell us about this one a little bit?
Yeah, the Orphic mysteries are different than other mysteries because they're translocal, and it's a bit more like Christianity, where the cult groups are dependent on traveling, not prophets per se, but priests, we might call them, who are spreading the Orphic mysteries, essentially like knocking on doors like Jehovah's Witnesses and telling people that they have mystery rites and purifications, and it's a bookish religion where they carry around books full of Orphic poems, that is, poems ascribed to Orpheus, and they basically perform rituals for you independently, which give you a better hope for your afterlife. And in the course we talk about the gold tablets, which are thought of as Orphic sort of passports or passcodes, but they're also like rudimentary MapQuest or Google Map kind of directions for where you go in Hades, so that you don't do anything wrong and accidentally return to Earth, because it's a religion that also believes in reincarnation.
Wow, that's fascinating. And with Orpheus, he's also a historical character to what the people believed at the time. I'm not sure if he really was or not, but this was to the people of the ancient world. He was a real person. He wasn't a god. He was a real human. And if I'm not, was he the priest of Dionysus? Was that what he was?
Well, I'm not sure we would call him that. But he was definitely viewed as a Thracian bard, that is, a singer and a poet. And he lived in a historical place at a historical time, and he was a real dude, and he wrote real poems. And that's how they viewed him. And his poetry was considered to be older than Homer's poetry.
Wow. And he met his fate, not to get too much into it, but as he passes away from his being attacked, basically, he's still singing his songs. He's still being a bard, even when his head's cut off, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a funny story, told really well by Ovid in the Metamorphoses.
Yeah.
He's killed by decapitation, and his head is thrown in a river, and it continues to sing as it floats down the river. And yeah, I'm not sure what the meaning of that is, but I think that it's one of the funnier stories about Orpheus, definitely.
I noticed that in 3 of the 4 Gospels, Jesus's last words are quoting Psalms, and I could be reaching. I do this a while. I like to reach sometimes, I like to but just out of fun. I wonder if there was some, maybe they're looking at the Orphic thing and saying, "Wow, that's a really great story, or a really grand way for somebody who's important to pass away to be singing hymns. Maybe this Jesus character should be similar. Maybe that's really what happened. I don't know. But do you think there might be something there because the Psalms are songs, if I'm not mistaken?"
Yes, I mean, the question would be whether he's quoted them or sang them. I always prefer to go where we are most strong. in terms of our evidence. So it's really Clement of Alexandria that makes the strongest connection between Orpheus and Jesus in the Protrepticus. And in the Protrepticus, Clement portrays Jesus as the true Orpheus. And at the end of the Protrepticus, if I'm not mistaken, or perhaps it's the Pedagogue, there's a hymn that Jesus sings as Orpheus. It's like an it's like an Orphic style hymn, but it's because Jesus is the true Orpheus. And yeah, when I was in Atlanta, I knew a musician, and he had a logo, and the logo said Orpheus Dei, the Orpheus of God, who was Jesus. So this is a fairly common idea. Yeah.
And back to the Nicene Preacher, the last line of his hymn was "Player of the Pipes." So he's making that connection too.
Player of the Pipes. Yeah, the pipes in this case are more connected with Pan. They're literally the Pan.
Sorry,
the Pan pipes. Yeah. Orpheus, when you see him in iconography, he's a lyrist. He's almost always has the lyre, which is the stringed instrument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, is it true that he has a quote that's similar to "Those who have ears to hear, let them hear"? Or is that something else?
Well, I don't know if it's close, but one of the Orphic fragments is "Close your ears, ye profane."
Oh.
And it's a command that those who are not ready for the mysteries get out. And this is the reason why Roman Catholics today don't give communion to people who aren't Roman Catholic. The same thing with the Greek Orthodox, because those are mysteries. And if you're not really part of that religious identity, get out. Yeah. I mean, they don't tell you to get out, but you sit in your chair and shut up.
And that's what makes a mystery religion a mystery religion, is the initiation rite, if I'm not mistaken. Wouldn't that be the bar minimum at least?
Yes, mysteries are initiations. Yeah. And I should have mentioned that in the first episode on the Samothracians, I give a general introduction to the mysteries. So we don't just get into this without any definitions. I walk you through this, so no worries there.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure you did mention that that's part of the attributes of a mystery religion is being initiated.
Yep.
Yeah. So number 4 is Isis and Osiris. Now we're going down into Egypt, and this one's really fascinating because you have these two gods who are just extraordinary in their capabilities, in their reach, and how popular they become. And let's talk about that for a couple minutes.
Well, it's difficult to just give a teaser here, but
yeah,
obviously Egyptian gods, as most of your listeners know, they're much older than Greek gods. And the Greeks knew this. In fact, Herodotus says that, we Greeks borrowed from you guys the names for the deities. And Osiris is just another form of Dionysius for most Greeks.
Herodotus makes that clear.
Yep, absolutely. It goes all the way back to Herodotus, and Isis is a form of Demeter. And so, but when these Hellenic deities had been fully Hellenized, you get distinctive initiation cults that are actually less focused on Osiris than they are on Isis. And so by the 2nd century, you have very distinctive initiation rites for your local Isis cult. And you can get initiated into Isis. You don't have to go to Egypt. She has temples in Athens and Corinth and Rome, and wherever she has a temple, you can approach the priests and they will give you the directions for purification. You have to abstain from sex for 10 days. You have to fast for 10 days, or you can't eat meat for 10 days. You have to be instructed in some of the religious books. And, yeah, then you go through the rite, and we have the most lovely description of what was involved in the novel called Metamorphoses, book 11, written by Apuleius. And yeah, there's much more, but that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, that's a good point, because what happens after that you get into in the course, and we're going to save that for the course. It's really, really fascinating. All I'm going to say is there's a lot of things that Apuleius tells us that are just this thing was big. This was a real salvation based cult, and it was big in Rome, it was big in Greece, it was big all over the place. And I was actually reading through Pausanias, and he's talking about there was a giant shrine to Isis in central Greece somewhere, where there was, every year that during certain time of the year, I forgot what it was. It was like a 3-day festival. Yeah, it was 3-day festival. And on the third day, they would do some sort of rite, some sort of offering. And somebody who wasn't initiated tried to sneak in, and they went into the inner sanctum and they saw a ghost. And so because they weren't initiated, by the time they got home to tell somebody, they died. They just dropped dead. And then he said, Pausanias says it actually happened twice. It happened in Egypt as well. So he's trying to make you believe this story really happened. But like, he makes it a big deal. Like, if you're not initiated, do not go to the sanctuary of Isis. Don't do it. You will die. What do you think about that?
Because the gods provide information and knowledge only to their true devotees. And this is why in the ancient world, atheism was a bad name. Well, unfortunately, it still is in many circles. But in the ancient world, if you tried to pry into the secret information given by the deity, the deity might kill you. Yeah. Because they view that as impious, and that's a capital crime in Athens. That's what Socrates was killed for, because his official charge was an impiety charge, because he was introducing new gods, or they called them demones, into the state cult, and they actually killed him.
Wow. How big was, or I should say, how popular was the Temple of Isis in Rome?
Oh, very popular. And she received huge attention from Caligula, and Vespasian later became a huge donor, the Emperor Vespasian, for both Isis and Osiris, and ensured that the Isis and Osiris cult continued way back into late antiquity. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of years after Christianity. It's received huge funding, an amazing temple. And again, it's one of those late antique cults that was one of the last to go. I mean, it was just a very powerful thing.
Do you think there was a connection between the Serapeum with Serapis and this particular Roman imperial, whatever it is, Roman Temple of Isis? Are they two separate entities, or are they sort of connected?
Well, I mean, for a temple is simply the house of a deity. So, it has a prime occupant. Either it's a temple to Isis or a temple to Serapis. Serapis also had his shrines and temples in other areas, like Athens and Rome. And for many, Serapis was just a sort of Hellenized form of Osiris, identified also with Hades, that is the god of the underworld. So definitely they're connected. And I would recommend, again, for those who you want to see like almost a pristine temple of Isis, go to Pompeii. And because it was preserved in when the volcano, let loose all of its ash, there's an Isis temple there that's it looks like, I mean, obviously it's damaged heavily. It doesn't have a roof, but it looks like it did almost 20 centuries ago.
Wow. And the last thing I want to touch on real quick is this Harpocrates Horus figure. How big is how much did this character or this god get revered in its time? Maybe even like, let's say, first century ish.
Well, Harpocrates is fun for me because Harpocrates gets the epithet called Carpocrates.
Right.
And Carpocrates means master of the harvest, and that's the name of a Christian theologian of the 2nd century. And since I've written an entire book on Carpocrates, he's very near and dear to my heart. But for Harpocrates, he is Isis's child, born with he's lame, but he's born because Isis essentially committed necrophilia with Osiris. Here we get back to the phallus imagery. She reconstructed the penis of Osiris and essentially had sex with the dead body of her husband. But the life-generating force of her husband was so amazing that she conceived.
Wow.
For Harpocrates. And Harpocrates is the child sitting on the knees of Isis, whom she's suckling, which later became the model for the Christ and the Virgin Mary. But yeah, if you put up that image again, Harpocrates is always depicted like this because that's how Egyptians depicted the babies. But the Greeks and Romans took this as the sh sign, so he became the god of mystery.
It also tells you how old the sh actually is. You know?
Yes.
That's a really interesting fact, that symbol of silence goes back this far. This particular model that I'm looking at is from the museum in Louvre, Paris, and it's supposedly a combination of Eros and it's called Harpocratic Eros. Do you know about this?
Yeah, we see theocracy going on here, and theocracy is the mixing of the deities. So Harpocrates doesn't have wings, right? But Cupid or Eros does. But when you mix the gods together, you've got both the gesture of silence and the wings.
So they thought of this deity as like a loving, sort of similar. As that, do you think they were just comparing the two, maybe?
But they're comparing the two because they're both children. They never grow up. They're sort of like Peter Pan.
Yeah. So yeah,
well, Peter Pan eventually grew up, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. That's really. I love this particular god has a lot of fascinating. And if I'm not mistaken, he actually does get killed as a baby. He was brought by Thoth into the. I'm probably gonna butcher this. Whatever. Maybe you know about this and you can correct it. He's taken by Thoth into the forest. And Thoth leaves him there and goes somewhere else. But then Isis finds him. He's dead, but she revives him. Is that how it goes?
So it depends on what source you're looking at, but that's actually another child. And that's so Osiris, to tell a long story, make it short. Osiris mistakenly took the goddess Nephthys as his wife Isis and had intercourse with her. And then Osiris was murdered by Set Typhon. And then Isis figured out that actually her sister Nephthys gave birth to Osiris's child, and that Nephthys had exposed this child out of fear of Seth. And Isis was the one who essentially adopted this child and took care of it as the child of Osiris. And he became Horus the Avenger, who actually, gave Seth a lot of trouble later on.
Wow. Interesting. So to go on to the next one now, Poimandres and the Corpus Hermeticum. and this is sort of related to what we're just getting into with these. Horus is in there, and there's some stuff with Isis and Osiris in there, but it's written by Hermes, who's having a dialogue with this character named Tot. Is that I think it's his father or son. But what's this about?
Yeah, so I think it's the 5th or 6th session, we talk about Hermetic mysteries, and there's too much to talk about in one episode. So I focus on the Corpus Hermeticum 1, which is a dialogue called the Poimandres. And in this dialogue, the divine mind, Poimandres, is having a conversation with Hermes. But later in the literature, Hermes, when he is redeemed or mentally transformed, he then has conversations with his disciples, and one of them is Tot, and another is Asclepius. So, yes, this literature, essentially, it's more late ancient Egyptian religion, but it's the religion sort of for philosophers, and it's the mystery cult for those who are still absorbed in Egyptian culture. And it gives you the mysteries of creation, and it gives you the mysteries of how the world is connected and reincarnation, and it has all those Egyptian themes. But it's a Hellenistic religion that's exactly contemporary with Christianity, and it's a highly philosophic religion. That is, it's meant for philosophers and people serious about getting good theological education.
Wow. And how long is this text? Is it kind of long compared to other ancient texts?
Nah, it'll take you 15 minutes to read. Yeah, or less. I mean, if you read it as a newspaper, you'll be done in 5 minutes. I mean, it's not anything long. So there's the Corpus Hermeticum, published by Brian Copenhaver, and he called it Hermetica. And I have Hermetica 2, published just in 2018. And this is all the Hermetic literature that you'll ever need to find.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of the Hermetica 2, where you take all the Hermetic literature and put it into one. That's why it's a little bit longer.
Well, Hermetica 2 is it's not all of Hermetic literature, but it's all of the fragments and everything that Christians say about it. So it's quite extensive.
Yeah, interesting. But the original Hermetica is relatively short, and it's specific on its own entity.
Yeah, it's a Byzantine collection of ancient Hermetic writings, and there's only 17 of them, and they're all quite short. They're short little tractates. Yeah, it'll take you, I mean, if you read all of them together, 3 hours max.
Nice. Is Hermes considered to be, is this how do I say this? I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Because you get the Hermes from the ancient Greek mythology, and then you get this Hermes Trismegistus. What's the difference?
Yeah, so Hermes Trismegistus, or Thrice Great, he's like your Eros and Harpocrates. He's a god that's undergone theocracy, that is mixing with the Egyptian deity Thoth, or Thoth, if you prefer. So he takes on all the attributes of the ancient Egyptian deity, and many of those attributes, like being the creator and being the god of writing and scholarship, weren't originally attached to the purely Greek Hermes. The purely Greek Hermes is associated with the market, business, and with messages. He's not a creator. He's not the god of wisdom. I mean, he's not stupid, but it's Athena who's the goddess of wisdom. So when Hermes merges with Thoth, he gains a whole new repertoire of superpowers, as it were.
Wow, and he seems like he's a lot more of a sage in this type of character. He's got like the beard. He looks like a high priest. He looks like a magician, maybe. He has a different look to him than the Hermes that's like real fast running with the wings on his shoes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, precisely. I mean, in obviously in Egyptian iconography, Hermes or Thoth is the ibis-headed deity, very thin, usually holding a pen and a piece of paper. And yeah, that's definitely very different than the Homeric Hermes with his, wings on his feet and pictured as a young man. Yeah.
And this Hermes is considered to be the Logos in his respective text.
Well, yes. The Homeric or Greek Hermes was the Logos insofar as he transferred logi, that is, messages. But when he becomes Hermes thrice great, that Logos aspect is enriched. So he becomes very much the creator of the world, much more like the Logos in John 1.
Wow, that's interesting. A lot of people forget, don't see that connection with. Everybody wants to compare Osiris or Horus, but Hermes is sitting right there, like, guys, I'm the Logos. I'm the one who's been there since day one. I'm the real deal. And I think there's more connections to be made with Hermes, with Jesus, I think.
Yeah, you really don't have to look far. Just a simple knowledge of Greek mythology can really throw a lot of light on the New Testament if you are willing to learn. And maybe that should be our next course, just simple Greek mythology in a scholarly way.
Absolutely. That would be amazing. Yeah, that's a great idea, actually. Guys, put in the comments what you think about that, if you think we should do that. Number 6 is a really ancient but fascinating rites of the Phrygians called Cybele and Attis. And this is a whole nother dimension, but it relates. It is the mysteries. Let's, without giving away too much, just give a little bit of a rundown on what's going on with the Cybele and Attis mystery religion.
Yeah, these are my favorite mysteries. They're the Phrygian mysteries, and Phrygia is central Turkey, sort of more on the western side of it. And yeah, again, we see phallic imagery here. Cybele is in love with Attis, who's a boy shepherd. But Attis is promised to the daughter of King Midas. And Cybele is angry about that. And so on their wedding day, she drives the bride mad. She cuts off her breasts. And then she drives Attis mad, and Attis completely cuts off his penis and testicles and dies under a pine tree. And it's a horrible story, but by the time Christianity gets going, they've allegorized Attis so that he has a kind of celestial immortality. So there's a famous, I don't know if you can find it, Neil, but there's a famous statue of Attis found in Ostia. That's the port of Rome, Ostia. And it's Attis just sitting...
Yeah, I found it.
Sitting in supreme, serene peace and life. And he's got this light smile on his face. He's lying down. Yes. Yep.
Is there another one?
No? That's him. There is another one, but this is totally fine. And he's bearing fruit. And if you look at his crotch area, there's nothing there.
Oh,
but
yeah.
What's important for Attis is these the starry crown, or what's called he has a cap with stars on it. But in this image, it's more fruits. But in this image, he's got the rays of the sun coming out. So this is a God who is supremely alive, even though the story said that he died. And that's the great mystery. And when you go through these mysteries, you learn how to bring together that contradiction.
Well, I just pulled up 2 more images that I want to throw your way. Maybe you can explain them a little bit. What's up with these 2 characters that are guarding it? Do you know who those are?
I don't know where this is from, so I can't comment.
Okay. It says Ostia. It says Ostia, but you know.
Oh well, that's fine. Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff in Ostia. This could just be a grave of an aristocrat. Yeah.
What about this one?
These okay. Yeah. This is a depiction of a Gallus that is a high priest of Attis. And so this guy at one point cut off his own testicles, and he became a devotee of the Great Mother, who is on his right there. And you can see that the Great Mother has sort of Attis at her feet. And this gentleman is giving little bits of incense on an altar. And this was his grave. This was his gravestone. He wanted to be known as the priest of Attis.
Interesting. Now, just to switch it up a little bit, and you hear this argument a lot about Christianity. The early Christians who were willing to be martyred, they must have believed it, so it must be true. Well, it's like, well, you got these priests who are willing to castrate themselves for Attis. Does that make this one true now? We have to. So, like, people can believe something, and that's fine. But, like, you see what I'm saying? Like, people believe things, and that's the norm.
Of course. Yeah, anyone who's done anything in comparative religion knows that people have done crazy, insane things, including massive amounts of self-harm for their deities. It doesn't matter who it is. It could be Attis, it could be Kronos, it could be, Allah. Yeah. It could be some god that we've never even heard of, like Jubajub bird. I mean, who knows? But people do, out of devotion to their deities, engage in practices of self-harm, and that's a sign of supreme devotion. In the case of Attis, the devotion is actually directed to the Great Mother, because essentially you're giving your sexuality to the mother so that you can focus on her.
Yeah, and so do you think there's something to be said about the blood of Attis having magical properties similar to the blood of Jesus having similar properties?
They don't really thematize that. All that they say is that from the blood of Attis came the violets. That is the violet flowers. And so that's why in images of Attis, he is surrounded by purple flowers.
Wow.
But beyond that, they don't make much of the blood. It's the act of sacrifice that they really emphasize. Yeah.
And so it's not like his blood that gives you salvation. It's just a simple look. His blood made these flowers grow. It's just kind of, it's not like, they don't like focus on it as like the central theme of this worship. Is that what you say the difference would be?
Yeah, I mean, some religions have a lot to do with blood and some don't. I mean, I guess vampirism, has a lot to do with blood too, but I don't know. I mean, so what? I mean, it's sort of like, here's a great case where when we're doing our comparisons, we don't want to like privilege Christianity and then see how other cults like measure up to it, because the point of comparison is just to see, and we'll get to this in a second, but to put all religions on an equal playing field. Right. We don't sit down and say, oh, how similar to Christianity are you? Well, I mean, many of these people, like, remember, they have religions that are much older than Christianity. So if you ask them that, it'd be like, what the heck are you talking about? And who cares? What's Christianity? So, I mean,
yeah,
I mean, it's just important to keep in mind.
No, I agree with that 100%. And I think the only reason why people love to do it is because we live in a world, especially in the West and in America, where most people are Christians. And so, I mean, if you go to other parts of the world, most people might be Muslim. So they're probably comparing things to Islam over there. And if you go into India, people are probably comparing things to their Hindu religion. And I think that's kind of just like how it naturally forms. But with that being said, I agree with you 100%. I think that these religions are just as special, if not more. I don't want to say more, but like they're older and they go back farther. They have more influence on what came afterwards, just naturally through evolution. It's like trying to compare different hominids. But the ones that came first are the ones that came first. That's just the way it is. So you have to go through these ones to sort of explain how religion gets to the point where it gets to in modern day times, if that makes sense.
Well, right. And so this is, why scholarship is important. I mean, I don't know, maybe some people think scholars are just useless, and deluded and maybe slightly diabolical. But I mean, this is what we do, right? So we don't, at least, those who are doing serious work in classics and philology, we don't say, we're not really interested that much in prioritizing Christianity. We're interested in getting the perspective of another person, another group, another religion, hearing their voice distinctively. So, and yes, that takes effort and that takes discipline and good methodology, right, to sort of bracket your own beliefs to give full credence and respect to those of others.
Yeah, I think that's important, the methodology thing, because you get a lot of people, I'm not going to say any names, but you get a lot of people who they make a hypothesis and then their methodology is, now I'm going to look for every little thing under every single corner, look under every nook and cranny to find a case to make this hypothesis look correct. That to me is like, it's such a, I just, you see it all over the place, especially with amateur people like myself on YouTube who, I'm not going to say, like I said, I'm not going to say names, but you get a lot of that. It's like, here's my hypothesis. Now I'm going to show you why I can make it look like it's true. Anyone can do that. Anybody can make something look true. I made a, and I want to get to Christianity for the last couple of minutes, but I was going to say, I made a fake, how do I say this? A fake claim. There's actually a Egyptian pharaoh named Isesi, Isesi, who had a vizier named Ptahhotep, and he had a mother named Mereset. And I go, look, guys, I found Jesus in the year 2500 BCE. Look, his name looks similar. He's got a vizier whose name is Ptahhotep. That could be Peter, and his mother's name is Mary. It's so crazy, but like people will actually do stuff like that. I'm not gonna, like I said, I don't want to get into names or anything, but I've seen similar arguments made by people because its name might look similar, but it's like the methodology behind that, and then you have to ask yourself, what is the motivation for people to make a secret religion based on another religion that has a totally different time period in a different language in a different country? What would be the point of that? There is no point, because it's not, you know what I'm saying? I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, I think that, yeah, I mean, what the irony of this is that some people are trying to, in a sense, undermine Christianity by pointing to these so-called parallels, many of which are very superficial. But the irony really is that these people are so Christocentric, that is so in a sense, prioritizing Christianity when they compare, that they are in effect distorting the religion of other people who aren't Christian by making it look more like Christianity. And in a sense, that methodology really, it's unfortunate because it really backfires. And what I always encourage my students to do is, it's what the Greeks called the epoche, but what we call bracketing. It's not totally possible to bracket all your beliefs. It's a mental exercise that you practice and a skill that you learn over years of training. Christianity was a religion. It began, and I believe it will end someday. And people will look back on it with the religion of, you know, the 28th century or the 30th, 35th century and want to do comparisons of Christianity, and it will be a dead religion. And that's where we are now with the others. I mean, and many of them aren't completely dead, you know. I mean, there are modern pagans and believers in Greek deities, so I want to pay my respects to them. But yeah, that's where we will be. So how silly will it be when we look back to the 21st century and we see all these people trying to compare, and their only method of comparison is to see how similar the other religions are to Christianity. Well, what is so important about Christianity? That will be just another dead religion, potentially within a few hundred years. There's nothing, it will morph into something else that is entirely unrecognizable. It might still call itself Christianity, I don't know. But let's just stop prioritizing that. That's not good methodology.
Good point. Good point. And just to finish this off, you have the last course on what's called Christianity and the Mysteries. Without giving it too much away, do you want to give somebody an idea of why this is the last one and what exactly is sort of a quick, without telling too much, summary of this one?
Well, really, Neil, we've been talking about that already for the past 10 to 15 minutes, because essentially what the last session is, it's about how to compare.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people love this theme set up by James George Frazer on dying and rising gods. And so I give you my take on the matter. I tell you why I disagree with James George Frazer, and I try to train your minds to conceive of, first of all, Christianity as a mystery religion and what it has to offer. And it's really about comparison and how we do it well. And so I will leave it to your readers or your viewers to, buy the course and try to deepen their knowledge and their methodology and their ability to compare and think in a sophisticated and deep way about these things, which will enable them, to go beyond, a lot of the chatter and really enter more deeply into knowledge and wisdom.
Fascinating. And time, check out the channel that David Litwa has on YouTube. And like I said, that's the outside looking in mysteries. The greater mysteries are at the Patreon, and there's links for that in the description as well. And this has been great. Thank you for your time, and you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.